Hi friend, welcome to our Water Connection, a space created to learn, connect and multiply the power of a conversation to give visibility to the water industry. I'm Jess Borges, a passionate human who believes that you should increase your water curiosity. Welcome to this new episode. Today, I'm joined by Jodie Bricout. Jodie is a globally recognized expert in circular economy and is one of the leaders in this area here in Australia. And to top this up, we are lucky enough to have her living right here in the heart of this project. She is based in Adelaide. Jodie is the global circular economy leader at Aurecon and a member of multiple boards and advisory groups in circular economy around the country. She spent part of her career in Europe and Dubai shaping best practices and policies in circular economy for large corporations, emerging innovators and governments. And now, since her return to Australia, Jodie supports Australia in adapting those best practices to our unique circumstances. So welcome to our Water Connection, Jodie.
Thanks, Jess. Great to be here.
Thank you. As I mentioned off cameras just before, circular economy was the most popular request from our community for an episode in season 1. For those who may not be familiar with the term, let's just start with the very basics. What is circular economy?
Absolutely. And it's great that your community really love this topic because so do I. I've kind of dedicated my life to it. So circular economy is a really interesting way or lens to look at sustainability. So rather than thinking about all the impacts that we're having, probably negative impacts that we tend to have on the environment and other things, we're trying to look forward to what could we look like, what could great water infrastructure look like in this future world where we're climate constrained and resource constrained. So we talk about 3 key principles with the circular economy. The first is that we're trying to design out waste from systems purposely from the beginning. So rather than deal with a waste at the end of pipe, which is relevant for you guys, how can we actually pull it out of the system before? So how can we design it out rather than dealing with it with traditional waste management techniques? The second, and that's also thinking about what kind of products and chemicals and things we're putting into our economic system, because there might be chemicals that we don't want circulating in that economic system in the future. So once we've got our stuff in our infrastructure and assets and our system, how do we keep that stuff at its highest value for as long as possible? So how can we keep pipes as pipes and certain equipment running as equipment, so through preventative maintenance and things like this, and then right through to its end of life, and how can we get those valuable materials back and keep them circulating in the environment, in the economic system as well. So those are the first 2 pillars. If we do them right, we're doing a great job, but we're still essentially in an extractive economic system. So we're still using up resources, using up carbon limits and things like that, but we're doing it much, much slower and much more effectively. So there's actually a third pillar that's incredibly important, and that's regenerate nature, because we need a healthy ecosystem to be able to give us all those wonderful services to help clean our water, clean our air, etc. So if we can also think about how we regenerate nature, how we do good and give back to the environment, then we can possibly have economic systems that could actually help us thrive in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Those 3 principles are quite key. Is it normally like a process? Like if an actor within the water sector, any sector in reality, wants to jump into start doing circular economy, is it like a step by step? Do you start by designing your waste, and then you start like keeping your things active longer, or is it like a 3 pathway that people should be following in parallel?
Oh, it's the messiest place to work, Jess, which is why I love it, because everyone comes at it 3 different ways, right? So some people that are listening that maybe work in asset maintenance will go, oh, yeah, that's me. I keep stuff running better and longer, and I never thought of my core business as doing stuff for the environment, right? Because it's like traditional what we do to save money. A lot of people do come through it through waste management, and then they go, okay, actually to change waste, we actually have to change what we purchase. So it kind of links through to procurement and then actually what materials are going through our system. So everyone kind of starts at a different piece, but then when you're trying to optimize a whole system, you soon find yourself in this messy, very collaborative space of circular economy. And it can be like a very simple thing on projects, like how do we get more recycled material into our water projects, or it can be I'm trying to set a strategy for the whole company. So it really depends where you're at, what your role is as well, sort of how big or how little you take it. But we actually do a lot of capacity building around this as well. And we find that, engineers, designers, communicators at every level sort of take it on and go, oh, I can see the world a bit differently with this. And I can see how to communicate more positively and get people going as well. So I'm really passionate that we all have a really important role to play with this, whether it's like up a strategy or just getting recycled materials in or making sure that waste gets repurposed better. They're all really valid, important things.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that concept that is not like this high level thing that is happening at a strategic only level in a company or whatever, but in our day to days and in every single role that we actually have. If we have those concepts there, and that's very interesting that you mentioned the capacity building, where you can start kind of changing the way people do. Yeah. Through your experience, like what is kind of the approaches that the water industry is doing to kind of achieve circular economy? You
The
mentioned some
water
of those
interesting
already.
is fascinating. And when I got back from living in Europe for 13 years, I organised some circular economy conferences here in Adelaide and invited lots of internationals. And I was really keen on making sure Australia was like leading in something, right? We're not just this little country that learns from the Europeans. We've actually got really interesting practices. And the water sector was the most obvious for me, especially being in South Australia, where we have a lot of cycling of nutrients and cycling of water happening because we're constrained. So we've had to be a lot more innovative. So I love talking about circular economy in the water sector and thinking about the different types of resources that flow through water utilities. So you can think about all your materials, your pipes and your backfill, and what are all the materials that are making up the infrastructure and how do we think about them. You can think about the nutrients that are going through the infrastructure and how we're getting nutrients back to soil, and all those amazing new developments around anaerobic digestion and where water utilities can sit in a very place-based approach to circular economy, and perhaps picking up other types of waste that come from outside the water system and turning that into valuable energy through anaerobic digestion, and also getting the nutrients back to soil. So there's a whole kind of nutrient energy nexus there as well.
Yeah.
And then energy in general. And then, of course, water. Like, how do we increase the circularity of water, keep water as its highest value? So potable reuse is something that everyone's been talking about for decades and decades, but that's, classic circular economy as well. So it's a really interesting lens to apply in different ways to water organisations. Also, the regenerating nature, because water utilities actually own so much land and manage it in interesting ways. I think there's spaces there that they could really innovate and lead as well.
Yeah, that's great. And like in terms of you touch on that, but maybe can you give us like some specific examples of those innovative like different projects that you have seen in the water industry? I'm asking because sometimes when I hear about circular economy is more around the wastewater part, and the like the nutrients part, but like for example in the side of the materials or the backfill, which is a lot more like down to the infrastructure and maybe in common with other sectors as well. Like what are we doing in there?
Well, just to give two super tangible little projects that my team's working on at the moment, because I lead a team of about 15 people across Aurecon, so around like 7,000 more traditional engineers, and it's really fun because we get to play in all different spaces. So we're just kicking off a project with S.01, and some of this is public, so they'll be happy that I'm talking about it, I'm sure. But some of the amazing people at S.01 have developed different purchasing methods and recycling systems for their plastic pipes. So they found that plastic pipes were being delivered in 5 metre lengths, and they actually only needed it in like 3.5 or 4 metre lengths. So they actually worked with their supplier to first be able to deliver it to them in shorter lengths so that they weren't getting so much waste off of every single pipe delivered. And then they also set up systems for them to come back and collect the offcuts to be able to recycle back into new pipe. So it's a really interesting program, and really passionate people have put it into place and negotiated with supply chains. They haven't been paid to do that. Like, it takes a lot to get that into place. And also it's been happening at regional depots in South Australia. So there's big challenges around logistics. How do you get that scaled up? How do you have storage to be able to keep all those pipe off cuts and get them picked up at the right ways? So we're looking at two things on that project. One is, for an innovative system like that, it might not, how do you explain those benefits beyond cost, right? So it might not stack up in a very short term. What's my ROI on this? There are bigger and broader benefits of it. And also, as you're getting it in place, it might not be as efficient as it is once it's at scale. Like, they're actually being super innovative in getting this into place. They know it's the right thing to do. They're investing time and energy. So what are our models for explaining the wider benefits, the wider economic benefits, the wider social benefits, the wider environmental benefits? So we're putting that all together to be able to say, okay, innovative projects like this, how do we actually show all of their worth? Because it's not really showing up on our very short-term indicators. But secondly as well, how do we scale that up? Like, there's lots of different challenges involved in it. So how do we take it from this really lovely little pilot to being, best practice for water utilities across Australia? So we really love that getting to scale aspect. The second one we're working on is in Victoria at the moment, and developing databases and tools so that water utilities can access information on recycled products that are actually available to them in their geography. So basically going through a whole heap of suppliers' catalogues and talking to suppliers and figuring out what is out there that's actually of interest, and how much data can we get about how recycled it is. Is it post-consumer? Is it pre-consumer? Do you have any information on the carbon benefits of it, etc.? And then making that available to all the water utilities. So very, very tangible tools. And in that you uncover like a plethora of different materials that are new and exciting, and, your recycled glass going into trenches and things like that. And there's a lot more. There's also a wonderful one that I only discovered recently that's also linked to S.01. Obviously, I'll just be a bit geographically focused here. But they're working with a startup down at their desalination plant in Lonsdale that has absolutely mind-blowing technology, where they're actually taking the desal brine and they're settling out the calcium component and then the magnesium component, and creating really valuable byproducts from these two things. So that's a process that they've got up and running, and it's working at pilot level. And if that gets to scale and can be used on desalination plants around the world, we start to unlock a lot of really interesting, beneficial reuse type aspects of those as well. But there's innovation everywhere. It's so exciting.
Yeah, it is. And it sounds to me like it depends a lot on the person or the team that is doing that particular work. Am I the one in charge of like buying these pipelines, and I'm starting to notice that they're always 5 meters, or like, can we do something with this brine? What do we need to embed circular economy in our business as usual? Like, to start kind of pushing that boundary of like having that innovation kind of here in our heads, to start thinking of the little things that can become pilots that eventually can become scalable.
Yeah, and that's where having that high-level strategy in place is actually really useful as well, that you're understanding that it's important to the business, you're understanding what it is, so you're building capability around talking about what you do in that circular economy context. So everyone's kind of close to it somewhere, because it's really how we operate our business in long-term ways. So how can you talk about and understand what you do contributing to it? So if you can get high-level visions and goals and ambitions. So we're doing a lot of work around, developing roadmaps for organisation, what's relevant in different parts of the business, and how do we actually identify the key initiatives and the key targets that we need to get to. But then I find that it's really interesting, because I've got this eclectic team of, highly technical specialists and, engagement people. And then half the time I feel like it's just making links. And because we're working on stuff all the time, it's like, oh, hang on, I spoke to this person at this other organisation that's doing something like that. Let's introduce you guys. And within organisations as well, that we'll go do a sweep of, what initiatives are out there and how do we build on them. And you actually find all these things that connect. And because we're so busy, we're all doing so much stuff, it's actually really, really hard to connect everything. So there's a combination of the sort of digital tools to help identify and connect things that are going on. But I actually really believe in humans as well, and the power of conversations like what you're doing here, Jess, that you don't know exactly where those connections are be, but actually sitting down and chatting and sharing stories and trying to figure things out, you come up with just so much. I don't think the robots are going to figure out how to connect everything. I think lots of cup of teas will help as well.
Yeah, I think we still need humans for a lot of things. And as you say, relationships and that part of like even doing things that you don't realize that are circular economy in your particular kind of role that can help
Yeah.
kind of in getting
And
solutions
relationships
as
are
well.
actually really important in a circular economy because it requires collaboration and trust. And I did a really interesting podcast a couple of weeks ago with Ashurst, so lawyers, around this. Like they actually develop tools so that we can trust each other and so that we can go into partnership in confidence. But that trust part of it, which sometimes means kind of knowing someone and eyeballing them and going, yeah, let's give this a shot. Like I think we don't have too much to lose. Let's take this risk jump together is incredibly important.
Yeah. And I guess that would be very important when you're starting like a new initiative or like a pilot. You did mention earlier that one of the challenges was in the scale up. Why is this a challenge? Is this because it's not in our business, or like why is scaling up is such a challenge at the moment?
I like to say that if it was easy, it would all be done already, right?
Fair enough.
Lots of innovations difficult to scale because it's change. It's changing practices. We're used to doing one thing, and then all of a sudden we have to change. And maybe that's okay with a limited number of people, but how do we like scale it up? And you just need you need investment of time and resources to be able to do that. Whenever you're making a business change at scale, you need investment. But I think we've got a really lovely window where we've experienced COVID and we understood having the rug just pulled out of us under us from one day to the next and needing to change. Like I think working on this pre-COVID, the concept of really changing business models was very, very foreign and shaken. And oh my goodness, we could never do that. And then we had to change very quickly and we innovated very quickly because there was a need. And I kind of push everyone to really remember that when we're talking about these things, because everyone is very keen to bring out the barriers to scaling. But a lot of them are a little bit like cardboard cutouts, right? You push on them and they fall away pretty quick. So
Yeah, okay.
I think it's the challenges around scaling generally and around change management. And it depends on what you're trying to scale. If it's more a technical challenge of scaling up a process to be pilot to demonstration to feasible and feedstocks and things like that, or if it's more about behavior and business process challenges, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. I had another question here. Like, let's say that we have a project that has been designed, or like a process or something has changed to develop or to implement circular economy principles. Down the line, like, I don't know, 3 years, 5 years time, how do we know that that is working? Like, do you implement kind of metrics or things to see
Yeah.
if whatever
Yeah,
has
yeah.
changed?
So,
Is that
like
how it works?
any good project, you need to monitor and evaluate. So, that's really, really important. And I think something's really interesting about metrics for circular economy is there are a certain number of circularity metrics out there. How circular is this project? And that's really interesting and really important. And it's material circularity indicator and things like this that are really useful. But I really push teams to think about, well, what are the outcomes that we want from this? Do we want things to be cheaper? Do we want to be creating jobs? Do we want to be reducing carbon emissions? Do we want to be and using circular economy as a framework to achieve those goals? So they might actually be KPIs or targets or indicators that you've already got in your basic business management set. If you've got targets around water prices and carbon emissions and things like that, it might be more about, okay, how do we make sure this circular economy project helps you achieve those goals? Or it might be about separate circularity indicators as well.
Yeah, definitely having those outcomes and like where are you going, what do you want, and then just be
Yeah,
able to keep
but
it.
it can be quite difficult as well because there is a lag between things that we're starting and projects that we're starting and the actual change in outcomes that happen. So often we do have to measure those kind of action and initiative type indicators first. I think it's really important to recognise that there's often a lag before the
Yeah.
really big, meaningful outcomes that can be quite frustrating as well. You don't see them in 6 months, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned on that as well that sometimes it's not about only the cost, or maybe it's just about like having your projects evaluated and
Yeah.
looked at from multiple lenses and many views that can help you seeing the benefits of that we know they're there, but like we probably need to have them
Yeah.
really tangible, so like it's at the end in the scale up time, then you have all the backup of information that you need.
Yeah.
Cool. I had a listen. You mentioned a podcast that you did recently. I have not listened to that one, the lawyers one. I did see it,
Still
but
out there.
I did listen to on another one that was the engineering reimagined, where you were having a chat with two different guests. I'll drop the link in the show notes for anyone that wants to give it a listen. It was quite interesting, and you had a chat with Wayne Hubbard, which is the CEO of Re London. And one of the aspects of the conversation that got stuck in my head, and this was weeks ago, was him saying that a big part of circular economy is changing those models.
Yep.
We have to talk about that, but it was also about changing the models that we offered to the community. It was, I think it was around waste, or I can't remember exactly what the example was,
Yeah.
to allow people to change behaviors, to change the way that we live by design and not by disaster. I really like that.
I love that as well. My new
How do
catch.
you yeah how do you think we can do that in the water sector, like if we look at it from a side of the customers, or like all of us as humans using water, how does circular economy enter it there from the consumer side?
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. I'll just give a little bit of context. So,
Yeah.
Wayne, so Re London used to be called the London Waste and Recycling Board, right? So traditional waste and recycling organisation. They invest in bins and rubbish and recycling technologies and things like that. And then they started up this big fund to actually try to reduce waste by giving Londoners different options of how they consume things. And a lot of what they invest in is startups that facilitate sharing kind of models. So there's a lot of apps and things where you can share your food, sell out your leftover food, go up the road and borrow someone else's ladder rather than buying a ladder and this sort of stuff, which is quite like odd for a waste and recycling organisation to be funding social media apps and things like that. But it's been really great, not only the waste reduction that's been involved in that, but they found that it was really positive around social connection during COVID as well. So it's really rebuilt a lot of social ties there. And also they've built a lot of new organisations and a new interesting different business models, and people renting things rather than buying them and things like that. So your car sharing type organisations as well. So that's just that little bit of context, which I find quite interesting. And I'd love your listeners to give lots of examples about how I get the feeling that water organisations have played around a lot with behaviour change around consumption and around maybe locally, like I think there's a lot of information provided to consumers about how to reduce their consumption and gamifying that and things like that. And there'd be a lot of people listening to this podcast that would be their bread and butter. And I'd love to know more about the different levers you can pull in that area. There's like technological stuff where you're helping people change shower heads to be more efficient shower heads in the homes and things like that, right through to some of the behaviour change stuff. They talk about in South Africa when they were getting towards day zero and things, and how they actually helped people to shift behaviour. But it's a super difficult thing to do. So I'd love to throw the challenge back to your listeners in how do we help residents change, especially around water use and recycling water, things like that at a very local level. How do we do that? I think the energy market's done it really well with solar companies actually making solar available without householders needing to pay for it, that they will go up and put the stuff up on their roof and they'll get cheaper energy from that. So what are the kind of things that we can be doing in that space? Should water utilities be providing leasing models for ultra efficient washing machines and things like that? Who knows? There's a lot of really interesting leasing models that are being looked at in new housing, for example, so that, why not when you buy a house, it's fitted out with great fridges and freezers and washing machines and things like that you don't actually own. They just get repaired and upgraded as they need to be. So you could imagine water utilities playing in that space as well if you're getting really efficient, great utilities out of it.
Yeah, and I think It'll be interesting to see also what could we do to get consumers to think about what happens with water after. Like, because
Yes.
as we're saying, like in the circularity, we're talking about the resource as being water, because maybe the consumer doesn't have a lot of access to, like, oh, the pipeline that is there, and I want to keep it there
Yeah.
for as long as possible. That's kind of the water utility responsibility. What we get as consumers is actual contact with the water, and what I've seen is like people tend to just kind of flush the toilet, goodbye, not my problem anymore,
Yeah. That's it.
when it is kind of part of that circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about what's leaving our homes in terms of microfibers from washing, let alone medications and things that we might be flushing down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's really, really critical as well.
Yeah.
So in
Yeah, it
France,
is.
they're looking at actually putting on filters in washing machines to try to reduce microfiber at the source rather than when it gets to wastewater treatment plants. But there's a massive amount of behaviour change that's required with that because you actually have to maintain the filters as well. So
Yeah.
that's a work in
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah, I think I saw a video around that a few weeks ago of one of the companies doing that, and yeah, and how do you create like those filters for like all sorts of different washing machines? But like, just
Yeah,
as any other innovation has happened in other technology, surely is not impossible, and that's why people are doing it, if even not like
I've got to give it a crack.
trying. Well, yeah, exactly. So certainly, I can see, yeah, different things that in the behavior part can be tackled in the future. Yeah. Jody, what do you think is the biggest challenge related to circular economy within the water sector that we're facing?
Oh,
Too
that
many.
question sucks. Like, how do you ever do that? What's the number one biggest thing? So we're going to die from biodiversity loss or climate change first. Like, there are a lot of really, really big problems, challenges, exciting areas to improve. So I'm not good at doing like here's the big one. I think
Yeah,
everyone's got one in their area. So
front of
for
them.
the
Yeah,
people that are building assets, they really need to think about the materials that they're putting in and designing their assets to be more maintainable and repairable in the future. I'm such a big fan of anyone that's in asset maintenance. I think maintenance should become like the sexiest industry to be in ever because I think they're just the heroes of the circular economy and people that are working behaviour change in the water industry. There's just so many big issues. And so how do we keep our nutrients, energy, water and biodiversity at the top? Like water industry is right at the middle of all of them, and I would be
yeah.
loath to pull any of them off the list. Sorry, can't do it.
No, that's true. That's true. I mean, and I think well, first of all, I asked this to all my guests, and like I don't know the percentage, but most of them we have gone into the climate change
Yeah.
scenario. So you did mention it. That is kind of one of the biggest
Well,
ones.
I did say
Um,
probably the first thing if we're gonna
it
die, it might
is.
be the first thing we die of. But
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I think the view that you give is quite clever and like and very, yeah, very thoughtful, because it's not only about the biggest challenge that we have. Yeah, we all know about climate change, but what is the biggest challenge that we have in front of us that we can
yeah,
actually action to? So it's a very nice way to actually see it, and it will be different in any angle that the people that are listening to these are working. So yeah,
yeah.
great answer. Anyway, no right or wrong here. um, so, Jody, what would be your message to young water professionals who might be listening to you right now?
Oh, be curious about everything and just be really thoughtful through your career about the impact that you're having. So the impact that you're having through your work and the impact on the people around you. That's what I tell every young professional: curiosity and impact.
Oh, nice. Yeah, thank you. And I normally close up with this question, but I have to change it a little bit for you. But why do you work in circular economy? So I normally ask, why do you work in water? But you do work in many other industries. So why do you work in circular economy?
Huh, that's a great question. Um, I have always been curious and focused on impact, as per
Yep.
my previous answer. And I studied as an environmental engineer, so I saw a lot of exciting solutions. And then I got into the real world and saw that exciting solutions didn't actually happen in the real world at scale,
Yep.
and became very interested in the system and why all these great ideas didn't make it and the kind of systems that we've built up for ourselves. And it was very kind of frustrating working in sustainability and life cycle assessment, trying to get my head around these systems and how can you crack it. And then I was in Europe at the time that circular economy was kind of really taking off. And at first I was like, oh, it's just what I've been saying, it's sustainability again, but they've just repackaged it, blah, blah, blah. But then I could see that people were getting it. People were really getting it, and they were excited about, oh, we're in a system, and we've got to change the system, and this is my part of the system. So I saw it as a wonderful framework to actually try to channel all that frustration into here's how we can get somewhere, and it's part of a system, so we don't control the whole thing, and that's okay. So for me, I really, I just love it because it's complex. I get to work in all different sectors with all sorts of different people. I know that I can't change the whole thing by myself. I think it's a really big thing when you're in a lot of people working in the sustainability and climate change space. It can get really overwhelming because it's quite, when you read the IPCC documents that come out, there's a lot of quite depressed chatter that happens. And realizing that you're just one cog in this wheel and that you can have your influence and that actually other people are having really good influence too. So hopefully we can make it together. That's why I kind of love the complexity and mess and positive framing of circular economy.
Yeah, and the impact, when you frame it like that, then you can kind of see your impact a lot more rather than trying to be the person that saves the world entirely, because there is not such thing. We just have to all work together. So.
Apart from Elon Musk, but everyone else is just a regular
maybe. Yeah. Don't know. Oh, Jodie, thank you very much for joining us today. This was very inspiring. I think we touched on the very basics of what circular economy is, the key principles, and how all of those are kind of looked through the water industry lens. And I think, you leave us with a lot of learnings and a lot of reflection about what could we do in the future in our own roles, and also looking ahead and staying curious and looking for that impact. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Jess.
And to you, my friend, thank you very much for joining us for one more episode of Our Water Connection. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Jodie. Follow us on LinkedIn as Our Water Connection to just stay up to date to any new episodes coming. To see you next time.